What if the universe is a lensing system? Kind of, say, whatever happens there expands to that. The lines aren't necessary. And whatever we do here, say this is Earth time. It becomes part of what happens there. So it's like that, or kind of more like that. It's part of this fill-in of the larger view. You could even say this view is kind of created. Well, it just exists, but maybe you would say it's like that, where you have potential other versions going both ways in time or probability or potential or whatever. And from these other versions, a kind of median is formed. This kind of grasping and consolidating and narrowing down until it's as if it's combined to a larger version where there are multiple possibilities, including the one singular version, as if all the possibilities are combined into one singular version. It doesn't really make sense because it's the same, perceptually it's the same thing. This is one iota, if you will, one perception, and this is one. Meaning this basically lasts forever. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these Earth things, and everybody's just doing stuff forever, pretty much. And so then this one is probably the same thing, but the substance within it is probably different. It's technically probably filled with more stuff, whereas you have the same amount of like pixels and bandwidth taking place here, but it's describing an environment, particle interaction and so on. Say here it's the amount of information in the environment describing, say let me check the mic, yeah, saying running the sand on a beach is actually happening. That much information is used to take place what's happening in somebody's mind at a mind community gathering party where they all think about cool stuff and it accelerates each other's brain, mind, and so on, and maybe, I don't know, it positively influences society for that coming period or something like that. Right now, that would be in a school, maybe a particle accelerator, a lab, or the unconscious aspects of how everything's working, cells, regenerating tissue. We don't actually make use of that much processing power, and we really can't at the way the brain works as far as it is now. But the point is that it seems the universe itself has made use of this multi-brain, kind of multi-tier, simultaneous radial fractal geometry processing power. And at first we just see it as kind of ghosts of reality, images, ideas, dreams, deja vu type situations, so on. We see it as a non-linear function within reality. From the other end, it might quite literally just look like a Rolodex of realities, and it functions as a processing system to put things in their place in a larger arrangement which holds all of the previous possibilities in a stabilized manner, which then can be used to recreate again, which then it repeats the process, but is just, we can't conceive of it. Just like we wouldn't conceive what this would be like. It's really not, there's no point in referencing it that way. But it doesn't mean, basically it's not linear. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a bunch of these. It doesn't mean you put a bunch of Earth realities together, you get this hyper-dimensional reality, and you put a bunch of hyper-dimensional realities, and you get this omnidimensional reality. You could, but perceptually, it doesn't add up just like linearly. It becomes something else. And so in a way, we don't really know. It's just like I talked about this in the previous that we can't conceive wholly in one moment the depth of the human character in this kind of human consciousness book we're reading and writing, because it's expanded across multiple pages and we can only see 1 or 2 pages at a time. So it's like we're inherently beyond ourselves. But the point is that whatever knowledge you have here of this will also be there, and so you'll always have a chance to continue forward. You'd have to go through like the entire loop, if you will, forgetting and not caring for it to actually be irreversible or something like that. But the idea is, so what if we have this system here? It's this is the system that expands. It's like a lensing system, which is really just like distance and space and time. But what if in this concept, what we do here, what happens to us here, what choices we make here play out not over and over, but over a larger period of time and reality or consciousness, and as well not larger, but it's just more complete. And so, in another look at it, if we allow ourselves to be bullied here, and then somebody has to take all the information that's here and make a larger story where all the other possibilities that we're not aware of can also fit in, and we can kind of live in this congruent, continuous, reality, and it does in a way have to be symmetrical. Whereas it's all complete, there's no loose ends in reality, otherwise reality wouldn't work. Which means it's all kind of carefully put together, which brings about a lot of questions and maybe misappropriations as far as what humans are and humanity is, and whether the importance is that of a toy or a doll or a creational system and so on. I think that's all really irrelevant because no one knows how easy it is to understand if it's understood as a lensing system, but the idea is the ins and outs of our social reality, the dynamic of what we intend and what we hold and what we do and our actions, how that influences the whole and our experience in space and time. It's like a multiplier. You could spend your whole life trying to build a reality where you have these principles, or you could live through these principles and in respect to these principles in this life here, and automatically that becomes this larger hyperdimensional system or part of it, as long as everything is capable of being transferred, which is what I began speaking about years ago, which is kind of the process of not encoding yourself, but rendering your consciousness in a way that can be not necessarily mirrored or transferred, but scaled up, so that more or less, maybe theoretically, it can actually function in, say, a larger universe or a more complete universe. Or the universe in time, if you rotate this image vertically, and then this is the bottom of time, and this is the surface, and so if what we're doing now has no relevance to what's happening on the surface, there's not a clear pathway in our minds. It's as if they can't find their way through. This also works for the metaphor. If what we're doing now remains within these principles that are rooted in our natural free will, which is in part overcoming the kind of default foundational desires of the body, or the base desires of the body, which is in a way then negating one's own will or desires, which is then the difference between desire and will, which is probably the first step of away from animal existence. I don't know if animals go that way. I'm just saying one's basically a humanoid thing leaning towards an animal reality, and then one's a human leaning towards something higher. We can lean either way. We're in the center, so if you're leaning down, it's because it's easier, and if you're leaning forward, it's because you want more. There's no other real way to describe it. And so if we stay within that kind of very narrow band frequency, it pierces this kind of expansion gap, not variation, but an exponential shift, an increase in the potential possibly for variation, which you could say is that, say is a pattern here that's stable. It's got this much noise and then this much information in the signal, so it makes sense, it adds up. Well, that's stable, and that's going to stay the same. Your perceptual capacity, you're not really, but the difference, the contrast between your own self-perception in as far as control over the reality and the possibilities and the potentials that exist, the possibilities that exist and the potential to change that from the technology, the variation, the wealth resources of the planet, so on, whatever it is. Say then you go to the bigger city, a hyperdimensional construct that's holding all the extra possible variations. Everything grows or expands, so it means the amount that we weren't in control, that too grows and expands. And so if you keep that to a bare minimum, you retain enough of the same signal, aka your soul frequency, your self-awareness, to end up here. And so the point is, if you're on a different frequency because your signal is lost in translation, it malforms, then your own soul doesn't find itself in this hyperdimensional view, which is the same as this one, but larger, and it takes time to then re-begin that learning journey of building upon the soul, the wisdom, reducing what we call karma, but is more so just learning how to not hurt yourself through others. And it's kind of like being lost in space or lost to yourself. So obviously these are like ratios